Good morning, it's Carl Forehand with the Desert Sanctuary, and I can't do anything about the big, huge sunspot on the side of my head. The last time I tried to fix the blind over there, it came crashing down. It was a disaster, and with my current condition of only having one hand and sort of one leg after my stroke, I'm not going to try to fix it. I hope you can deal with it and it's not a big distraction for you. But I wanted to talk today about my journey with peace. I used to say that peace is not the absence of turmoil, peace is the presence of God. That's what I would preach. Not that I hardly ever felt that peace, but I think I kind of understood that it wasn't about my circumstances, it was about, my something with God. And Martin Luther King also said, peace is not the absence of turmoil, it's the presence of justice. And so we got Black Lives Matter movement says, no justice, no peace, reflecting Dr. King's mantra that peace is not the absence of turmoil. Peace is not when we remove all of the things in life that disturb us, but it's the presence of something, of God, of justice, of maybe awareness. But there was that philosophy, and like I said, as a pastor, I didn't really feel that often. When I started through my deconstruction, a preacher named Zohn encouraged me to, number one, to stay on the journey and to be at peace. Catholics say, peace be with you. That's the typical standard greeting when they greet each other. And when somebody says, be at peace, my response in my head, of course, is, how do I do that? What does that mean? I'm glad that you wish me well and you want me to be at peace. And that's what you hope for me, and I appreciate that energy. But how do I get there? So when I was going through my shadow journey and writing the book Being, a journey towards presence and authenticity, as I was writing that book, I was discovering how my life was progressing. And I discovered two things in that book, the two things that are in the subtitle, presence and authenticity. And I describe them as being where you are, that's presence, and being who you are, which is authenticity. So oftentimes now when I sign one of those books, I'll say, be where you are, be who you are, comma, be at peace. And Laura asked me the other day, she said, sometimes you write be at peace and sometimes you don't. And I said, maybe that's just me being me and being kind of inconsistent. But maybe it's also that I don't always feel like I'm at peace. Sometimes peace seems to elude me and it just doesn't seem to be there. And maybe I'm kind of pulling back from telling someone else to be at peace when I'm not telling them how. But certainly being where you are, being present and being authentic, as I talked about in the book, seems to help me, enable me to get there more often or to pass by that peaceful existence. I don't know if it's ever an eternal destination, but we can get there. As a pastor, as I said, I've seldom found peace. I was hoping that someone would give me peace, that I could pray for it and somehow it would just be there. And it didn't seem to work that way. There was a lot of built-in stress in the ministry, but also there's a lot of misunderstandings. And I think when you don't understand or comprehend reality or truth, it's hard to experience peace. So another thing that helped me, and it was in conjunction with what I talked about the Being book, about understanding presence and authenticity was when I did my shadow work. When I was taught by some Benedictine sisters and by my friend Dr. Paul Fitzgerald and an author named Robert Augustus Masters, as I was going through one of the biggest tragedies or toughest times or dark nights, they encouraged me to be with the parts of me that felt something, that felt anger, that felt distress, that felt sadness. And as I would learn to be with those parts of me that felt those things, I noticed there was a shift in me that, number one, I would become less reactive and more often at peace. I would respond to things. So the things in my life that triggered me still triggered me, but no longer was I reactive. I was responsive. And that seemed to put me at peace. So normally I would react. That shadow stuff would come up in my life, and it would misbehave. But once I could be with those parts of me, we call that process focusing. When I could be with them, they would shift. And because I was aware of them, because I didn't judge them, I just let them be and let them try to teach me, then I found that I was more often now at peace, no matter what the situation. I can't promise that that's every day and every situation, but it's becoming more common. After deconstruction, I found I was still evolving. I wouldn't even call it reconstruction, but as I'm evolving, I'm finding greater peace and less toxicity. I think when we get rid of the toxic doctrines and our toxic practices, our toxic community, and we start to remove some of those things and get more practices that serve us, then I think we find more peace. Sometimes it seems like peace is just encountered when I stay in touch with my authentic self. So as I'm learning to go inside, I find my authentic self. And I want to say that is not detached from reality. I believe in mindfulness and I believe in meditation. It helps me. But sometimes mantras can bypass the very thing that we need to feel. We say feel what you need to feel because when you feel something, it changes, it heals, because it wants to be heard. So sometimes we can have too positive of an attitude and we mantra ourselves right on by the issue in our life. And I don't think we want to do that. I don't think that's where you find peace because that stuff always comes back to visit us. When we are authentically encountering life, not necessarily to change it or to manage it or control or wrangle it, but to experience it, I think we find an acceptance that a lot of the mystics talk about. They talk about accepting. It doesn't mean that I like the situation. It doesn't mean that I approve of it, that I want it to stay like this. But if I can learn to accept the now, accept the present that I'm in, then I think more often than not we'll be living authentic lives, which I think, again, is a key to peace. Maybe not the absence of turmoil, but the presence of a higher, truer, authentic self. And I wanted to do my best to explain what I've been learning. Many of these things I don't consider myself an expert. I just am learning, and I wanted to share it with you, and including pronouncing the Sanskrit words. Sanskrit is a more ancient language from India, and you use it in yoga and things like that a lot of times to communicate across cultures and makes a more simple way of communication. So yoga poses, the breathing in yoga and things like that are expressed in Sanskrit and many times in in meditations, you'll hear a common meditation that's Seth, Chit, Anada. And it means existence, consciousness, and bliss. And I've been meditating, been thinking about this a lot lately. The first word, Seth, is existence, consciousness, or the three words are existence, consciousness, and bliss. But Seth is reality. So Seth means reality or existence or truth. Some people say absolute being or being. And I began to fall in love with this idea way back when I was a preacher, and I would see the words from Yahweh, I am. When he's talking to Moses, and Moses says, who do I say sent me? He said, tell them I am has sent you. Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. And that word, I remember thinking about it when writing sermons and just kind of meditating on it, that it seemed so deep and so meaningful to say I am. And then later on in my being journey to discover that thought of absolute being, of the fact that I am also. And just staying with that thought of my existence. I have a tattoo now that's written in Mandarin, and it expresses that same idea that I am and I exist. That is, so some people translate that word to mean truth. The truth that I am, and that I am my authentic self, and that is reality. So that first word, being, existence, is so important to peace, existing in the present and existing with our authentic self. In conjunction with that chit, the second word is consciousness. And friends of mine can explain consciousness way better than me, but consciousness, subconscious, superconsciousness, and all of those things that we're thinking about these days and discovering more of, that we are conscious of the divine. We are becoming more conscious of our true and authentic self and of our reality, of our being that we talked about just a minute ago. But the last word is Anada. And Anada, the most common word is bliss for that. Bliss or happiness, emotion, the knowing of our being is bliss, causeless joy. And in the tea shop, I talked about what I was discovering about the interaction with the tea shop owner of just being delight. So that bliss, I think, comes from our knowing. It comes from our being and our existence and our consciousness that then produces that bliss or emotion. Conversely, through religion, we've been taught not to have emotion or not to focus too much on that emotion. Maybe sometimes we should be joyful and worship or something, but don't trust your emotions. And I think bliss urges us to embrace our emotion, to embrace what we're feeling, and to, when we know ourselves, we'll know God. When we're being with ourselves, when we're conscious, then we'll have that bliss, and we'll know that joy and that emotion, and we'll know God. So my journey of peace has definitely been a journey, but I just find myself encountering it more often, and I hope you will too.